cyber briefing for Monday the 26th of June. Hope you all have a great weekend. Yeah, I shall be with you for the whole of this week, barring any technical challenges with Restream as per last week. So, where shall we start? Log in with. I'm sure you've all noticed an increase in the whatever. Well, one of those possibilities is log in with Microsoft. The idea being to use OAuth in order for your successful authentication against, let's say, Google or Microsoft or Apple or whatever, to give you authorization for other apps. Okay. Idea being it kind of simplifies, it's a sort of single sign-on type thing, isn't it? That's like, you only need to know one username and password. It's all very convenient. It all works wonderfully, except when it doesn't. It appears that Microsoft's implementation of OAuth is flawed and basically armed with knowledge of a platform and knowledge of potential victim's email address. It is possible to authenticate using Microsoft login with any known victim email address. So it's potential. It is a little more complicated than just putting the email address. But if you understand how OAuth works, which I'm not going to claim I really do, I have a working knowledge of, but I'm not deep in the code. You can see it is a complicated environment. So this incorrect implementation has been dubbed NoAuth, which is, I think, quite funny. That's one of the funnier names I've come across for these things for a little while. Anyway, regardless of that, just be aware it is being tracked as a bug that is off the back of other failed implementations of OAuth in various other systems. So just be aware and think carefully about how much you trust the authentication provider if you're using log in with your Apple ID or log in with your Google, whatever it may be, because this demonstrates that unless the authentication provider is doing a good job, it may well be putting your systems at risk. NHS hackers have complete access to millions of medical devices in UK hospitals. I can't say that this is hugely surprising. All sorts of organisations have got lots of IoT devices. Medical institutions will have a complete subset of things that other organizations won't have, but pretty much everything these days is expected to be on the network and is, as it were, controlled by some form of computer. So where IT normally looks after things on the network, that generally doesn't extend to things that they don't purchase and manage, which would be a whole load of stuff like MRI scanners, CT scanners, drug distribution stations, pacemakers, linked inhalers, heart rate monitors, you name it. Cameras, there's all sorts of stuff around hospitals, which is basically unmanaged from a patching and vulnerability perspective. Some of these devices are unpatchable. They do their job. They're on a particular version of whatever it is. Often, actually, these devices use Linux in the background, which isn't surprising. Good operating system, but unless somebody is keeping it up to date, it is liable to become vulnerable to newly discovered attacks or exploits. So the big problem that they're kind of highlighted here is that these devices, from a cyber perspective, sort of fall between two stools. They're not managed by the IT department on an infrastructure basis. However, the people that are responsible for the use of them are not people who you would expect to be keeping them, patched up to date and tracking them for vulnerabilities. And anyway, even if these devices are vulnerable, what are you going to do? You're going to say to somebody, "Well, I'm so sorry, you can't have your treatment today because we've switched off the device that we need to use because it's been discovered that there's a vulnerability in it." Obviously, that's not going to happen. It is a thorny problem. I think the best that you can do if you run an environment which has got IoT devices which are either difficult to manage or basically just frozen in time, given their functionality, is make sure you have mitigating controls around those things. Try to protect them at a network level, and also make sure you have really good monitoring. Pull the logs off the things. Get some network monitoring. What's talking to them? What are they talking to? Understand what's going on those devices. If they're running Linux, it might even be possible to implement lightweight protective agents on them. Although if that then potentially puts their function at risk, obviously that isn't going to happen. It is difficult. The NHS was massively hit by WannaCry in 2017 because partly because of the nature of the way that technology is managed in the NHS leads it to be an almost unsolvable problem to keep everything up to date and understand what's going on. It's a very fragmented approach to pretty much all things NHS. But other organizations with IoT devices suffer from a similar or sort of parallel issues. A lot of factories have got factory systems that are computer controlled. Those systems need to be very carefully monitored. One of the world's largest manufacturers also got hit by WannaCry. They were very much on top of their global cybersecurity, but for a long time afterwards, there would be little clusters of WannaCry that would pop up, often as a result of some or other factory system being brought online to do some or other job, and immediately being hit. So it's difficult to keep on top of these things, but the best you can do is get some visibility, build your plans around the fact that this stuff is vulnerable, put in some mitigations, and see where you go. I guess we're all aware of the scatter infected USB sticks around and see who picks them up and plugs them in. How many times have you been to an InfoSec conference, and people have given you something that is a USB stick? Here, have this thing full of potential malware and just plug it into your machine. I know it's not in the best interests of vendors to do that stuff, but it astonishes me that they would think that people would want to accept that risk. However, there's a variation on this one in the US, which is I think quite an interesting one. So the US Army's Criminal Investigation Division has warned military personnel that someone has been sending unsolicited smartwatches in the mail. So yeah, that potentially these devices could be they could be used for all sorts of things, even if they're not actually loaded up with malware. Just because you don't know, who sent it to you, you don't know whether it's being tracked. You don't know, so there's all sorts of stuff that could be going on. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. If somebody sends you something that looks a little bit too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. Android users have been made aware of, or yeah, well, it's been announced. So we're making people aware that there is a glitch in the 999 call feature that raises concerns. So users of Android phones have been alerted by UK police about potentially hazardous bug in the 999 emergency call feature. Authorities are worried that some Android devices could unintentionally mute emergency calls. This is to do with the way that an Android device behaves if you repeatedly press the power button whilst trying to call emergency services. Now, I don't know about this from an Android perspective. I do know that if you repeatedly press the power button on an Apple device, it actually calls the emergency services, which is actually quite a nice feature, quite a potentially useful feature. So UK police have reached out to Google and asked them to address the issue because under certain circumstances, repeatedly pressing the power button on an Android device will mute the call, which could potentially lead to confusion, lost information, delays, so on and so forth, and potentially therefore be life-threatening under certain circumstances. So if you're using an Android phone and you are in need of the emergency services, just be aware of the fact that if you do either deliberately or accidentally press power button multiple times, it may end up muting that call. I don't know how you bring it back. Presumably there's something on screen that says bring the call back, but there we go. And then finally from me today, LastPass users LastPass users are complaining that they have been locked out of LastPass, their LastPass accounts, due to an MFA reset. So it looks like LastPass has enforced an MFA reset based around some updates to the security of master passwords. So according to LastPass, to increase the security of your master password, LastPass utilizes a stronger than typical version of password-based key derivation functions, which are abbreviated to PBKDF2. It effectively is a password strengthening algorithm that makes it difficult for a computer to check that any one password is the correct master password during a compromising attack. The forced logout and the MFA resync were part of updating the algorithms associated with doing this. However, it does appear that at least some users, when forced out and made to resync MFA, get stuck in an MFA resync loop. To make things more irritating for users, you can only raise a support call once you're logged in. So there we go. Not quite sure what LastPass are going to do about that one. So we've locked you out because we've buggered something up, and we won't let you talk to us because we won't let you log in, and we won't talk to you unless you're logged in. So hopefully that one will get sorted quickly. Password managers are invaluable these days, literally hundreds of long, complex passwords to manage. And better ones are actually even integrating authenticator apps into the password manager. So yes, of course, it does raise the question of what do you do if something goes wrong with your password manager, but the risk of that, I still believe, is significantly less than the risk of, well, how am I going to manage 300 individual long complex passwords without writing them down somewhere? So anyway, that's all from me for today. Hope you have a great Monday and a good start to the week, and I'll speak to you all again tomorrow.